Layer management. Now, when you're working in Photoshop, layer management is probably the most important thing to do when you're working with a large size document. Managing layers is key to making sure that you don't get lost in that big aspect or big design of yours. And that's why we learn very quickly about managing your layers in the layers panel. For that, let me focus in on the layers panel. Now you can see the layers panel is generally, it has these many layers. When you start a new document, it will probably have a background, which is generally locked. It has an eye symbol that basically represents whether it's visible or not visible. Now, if it's locked, I cannot change any feature of the layer. Let's start with unlocking the layer. To unlock a layer, I can double click on this. It opens a new layer option, which is basically converting it into a new layer. Click on OK. And that's it. That's how I have the new layer, which is unlocked. Right. So that is how you unlock a layer. How do you create a new layer? For that, you can use this option right over here, which is to create a new layer. It creates a blank layer that you can see because of the black and white or the gray and white grid in the thumbnail. Now, gray and white depicts generally in Photoshop the transparency. If there's nothing over here, the grid is basically transparent. If you compare that to the layer below, if it's entirely white, that means the layer is entirely white. Now I can also rename these layers by double clicking on it. If I double click on any layer, I can rename it unless it is locked. And let's say this is my blank layer 1. Let's keep it like that. That's how I can rename my layers. Now I can also turn on or turn off this layer. For that, let's zoom out. Let me create a simple rectangle right in front of this, right in center. I'll have to select the layer for that and end up creating a simple rectangle. Now with this rectangle, I can turn on or turn off this rectangle or the visibility of this layer without actually losing out on the visibility. So I can turn it off and then it's not visible, and I can turn it on, then it's visible. If it's turned off, in the final output, when I'm rendering this or saving this file in a format that will be saved with that can be shared with others, this layer will not be visible, but it's still there in case I need it. This is particularly handy when I'm probably working with text. So let's say I have a text which is something like this. Now I can move this text around and keep it visible or remove it from my screen in case I need it later. Now let's move on to opacity. Opacity is basically how opaque or how clearly this layer is visible depending on the functions that are there. So in this case, the layer that has been selected has an opacity value of 100%. That's basically 100% of that layer should be visible. If I start decreasing this, let's do this to 0 first, you'd see the layer is not visible at all. If I bring this to around 50, you'd see the layer is now somewhat transparent. Somewhat basically means exactly 50% transparent. That means 50% of the actual color is visible over here. If I move this on top of the other layer, you will be able to see the color in the background as well. If I'm probably seeing color over here, but it could be anything else. If I increase this opacity to 100, the layer is entirely in the same color and it does not showcase whatever. It does not let any pixels from the background pass in front of it. So that's opacity. Now, moving on to blending modes. Blending mode is an entirely different or an entirely deep concept, but you can see very quickly what blending modes are. If I click on this small drop down over here, it has various options. This is what blending modes are. Now, blending modes is basically how one layer interacts with the other layers underneath it and above it as well. So there are multiple layers. We'll go through these and we'll try to experiment what works and what these different scenarios are and where it works the best. But you can see very simply how there are different options, and with each different option, although the layer does not change, but the visibility of the layer on my canvas changes with every new option. Alright, moving on to the next thing, something called layer styles. Now this is something that's very powerful and very useful in Photoshop. Now there's one thing that is particularly useful in Photoshop, which is layer styles. With every layer that is available in my Photoshop canvas, I can create or I can add a layer style. So to do that, let me double click on any layer and it opens up a new window right here that says the name of the layer, and this window has multiple options. You can see the multiple options are bevel and emboss, stroke, inner shadow, inner glow, outer glow, color overlay, gradient overlay or pattern overlay, and even drop shadow. You probably have seen this across different places, but let's see how you create them. To create or to apply any of these layers or these layer effects, you click on this tick mark over here and then you can go deeper into the settings. We'll not do that right now, we'll probably come back to this later, but it's just an example of how you can add, let's say, a drop shadow to the text. With this drop shadow, let me increase the opacity of the shadow, increase the distance somewhat, change the spread, and increase the size as well. Let's say the angle over here is like that. So this is basically how you apply any layer style to a particular layer. Let's turn that off and go back to our original format. Now the next thing that you done is to group layers together. To group layers, I can select multiple layers. I'm pressing Ctrl, or you can press Command on your Mac. Once I've selected these layers, I can click on this icon over here that creates a new folder under which all of these layers are implied. Now grouping basically helps you move a lot of things around together as a single unit. Now if you can see over here, I have selected the move tool and the auto select is selected with the entire group. When I do that, the entire group is able to move. Let's jump onto a different document to see how this works better. Now here's one simple template that I've created. It says travel the world. There's a photo over here. There's some sort of a button and some text, which is a phone number and a website. I see the spelling of the website is incorrect over here, but that's okay. I think we can move on with that. And in the layers panel now, you can see the multiple layers that have been plugged together. There's something for the background, which has a cloud and a simple white layer. Similarly, there's an image where I've placed the entire thing. There's a book now button. Within that layer, you can see that there is a text and a rounded rectangle with some text. The text over here is the website, the phone number, travel, and the world have been typed in two different layers to keep the colors separate. And there's something for the logo, which is currently empty. With this, I would be able to move the entire group around together in one go. There's another thing that you can do with the layers, which is merge layers together in any different format later. So I can select both of these layers by again holding Command or Control. Right click on this and click on merge layers. When you click on merge layers, you can imagine what happens. These layers, which are currently probably two layers together, will become a single one. And the entire cloud and the image, the white rectangle that was there, has now been clubbed into a single layer. This could be particularly handy when you're probably using layers together and you're definitely sure you're not going to be needing them separately. Now, let's look at another thing, something called linking layers. When I'm linking layers, it is basically used to move things around if I do not want them to be clubbed or grouped together. Now in this case, let's do something. Let me move the text outside Or let's say we have the text right over here in two different layers, travel and the word. Now I would want the text for both these things to be moved together, but I do not want these two layers to move. Now to do that, I can select both of these layers and click on the link button right over here. When I do that, the layers are now linked, and if I move one, it'll automatically move the other one as well. You can see how I'm moving probably just the travel layer. Let me select just one layer here as well. You can see how these layers are moving together. Lastly, there are a couple of other things that are over here. Let's quickly go through all of these. This is for layer style. We've already seen this. This is one other way to click on a layer and apply a layer style. This is something called mask. This will come to in great detail because this is a very deep type topic. There are new fill or adjustment layers. There's something for creating a new group that we've already seen. There is selection or addition of a new layer. And lastly, there is a deletion layer. So I can delete any layer by clicking on it and holding this. It gives me the option over here. I can click on don't show again if I want to. But in this case, let's not do that. And this is one way of keeping your layers or clearing your layer panel and keeping it safe.